9. The next morning was bright, clear, and sunny. I woke up with a motorman's glove in my mouth, drank 2 cups of coffee, went through the morning papers. I didn't find any reference to Mr. Arthur Gwyn Geigen, either of them. I was shaking the wrinkles out of my damp suit when the phone rang. It was Bernie Olds, the DA's chief investigator, who had given me the lead to General Sternwood. "Well, how's the boy?" he began. He sounded like a man who had slept well and didn't owe too much money. "I've got a hangover," I said. "Tisk, tisk." He laughed absently, and then his voice began to shade to casual, a cagey cop voice. "Seen General Sternwood yet?" "Uh-huh." "Done anything for him?" "Too much rain," I answered, if that was an answer. They seem to be a family things happen to. A big Buick belonging to one of them is washing about in the surf of Little Fish Pier. I held the telephone tight enough to crack it. I also held my breath. "Yeah," Olds said cheerfully, "a nice new Buick sedan all messed up with sand and seawater. Oh, I almost forgot there's a guy inside it." I let my breath out slowly that it hung on my lip. "Reagan?" I asked. "Huh? Who?" "Oh, you mean the ex-Lager the eldest girl picked up, went and married. I never saw him. What would he be doing down there?" "Quit stalling. What would anyone be doing down there?" "I don't know, pal. I'm dropping down to look-see. Want to go along?" "Yes." "Snap it up," he said. "I'll be at my hunch." Shaved, dressed, and lightly breakfast, I was at the Hall of Justice in less than an hour. I rode up to the 7th floor and went along the group of small offices used by the DA's men. Olds was no larger than the others, but he had it to himself. There was nothing on his desk but a blotter, a cheap pen set, his hat, and one of his feet. He was a medium-sized blondish man with stiff white eyebrows, calm eyes, and well-kept teeth. He looked like anybody you would pass on the street. I happened to know he had killed 9 men, 3 of them when he was covered, or somebody thought he was. He stood up and pocketed a flat tin of toy cigars called entrees, jiggled the one in his mouth up and down, and looked at me carefully along his nose, with his head turned back. "It's not Reagan," he said. "I checked. Reagan's a big guy, as tall as you and a shade heavier. This is a young kid." I didn't say anything. "What made Reagan skip out?" Olds asked. "You interested in that?" "I don't think so," I said. When a guy out of the liquor traffic marries into a rich family and then waves goodbye to a pretty dame and a couple million legitimate bucks, that's enough to make even me think. "I guess you thought that was a secret." "Uh-huh." "Okay, keep buttoned up, kid. No hard feelings." He came around the desk tapping his pockets and reached for his hat. "I'm not looking for Reagan," I said. He fixed the lock on his door and we went down to the official parking lot and got into a small blue sedan. We drove out Sunset, using the siren once in a while to beat a signal. It was a crisp morning with just enough snap in the air to make life seem simple and sweet if you didn't have too much on your mind. I had. It was 30 miles to Lido on the Coast Highway, the first 10 of them through traffic. Olds made the run in 3/4 of an hour. At the end of that time, we skidded to a stop in front of a faded stucco arch. I took my feet out of the floorboards and we got out. A long pier railed with white 2x4s stretched seaward from the arch. A knot of people leaned out at the far end, and a motorcycle officer stood under the arch, keeping another group of people from going out on the pier. Cars were parked on both sides of the highway, the usual ghouls of both sexes. Olds showed the motorcycle cop his badge, and we went out on the pier into a loud fish smell which one night's hard rain hadn't even dented. "There she is, on the power barge," Olds said, pointing with one of his toy cigars. A low black barge with wheelhouse like a tug's was crouched against the pilings at the end of the pier. Something that glistened in the morning sunlight was on its deck, with a hoist chain still around it, a large black and chromium car. The arm of the hoist had been swung back into position and lowered to deck level. Men stood around the car. We went down slippery steps to the deck. Olds said hello to the deputy in green khaki and a man in plain clothes. The barge crew of 3 men leaned against the front of the wheelhouse and chewed tobacco. One of them was rubbing his wet hair with a dirty bath towel. That would be the man who had gone down into the water to put the chains on. We looked the car over. The front bumper was bent, one headlight smashed, the other bent up, but the glass still unbroken. The radiator shell had a big dent in it, and the paint and nickel were scratched up all over the car. The upholstery was sodden and black. None of the tires seemed to be damaged. The driver was still draped around the steering post, with his head at an unnatural angle to his shoulders. He was a slim, dark-haired kid who had been good-looking not so long ago. Now his face was plush white, and his eyes were a faint dull gleam under the lowered lids, and his open mouth had sand in it. On the left side of his forehead there was a dull bruise that stood out against the whiteness of the skin. Alls backed away, made a noise in his throat, and put a match to his little cigar. What's the story? The uniformed man pointed up at the rubbernecks at the end of the pier. One of them was fingering a place where the white 2x4s had been broken through in a wide space. The splintered wood showed yellow and clean, like fresh-cut pine. Went through there. Must have hit pretty hard. The rain stopped early down here around 9 p.m. The broken wood's dry inside. That puts it after the rain stopped. She fell in plenty of water not to be banged up worse. Not more than half-tide or she'd have drifted further. And not more than half-tide going out or she'd have crowded the piles. That makes it around 10 last night. Maybe 9:30, not earlier. She shows under the water when the boys come down to fish this morning, so we got the barge to hoist her out, and we find the dead guy. The plainclothesman scuffed at the deck with the toe of his shoe. Oz looked sideways along his eyes at me and twitched his little cigar like a cigarette. Drunk? He asked. Of nobody in particular. The man who had been toweling his head went over to the rail and cleared his throat in a loud hawk. That made everyone look at him. Got some sand, he said, and spat. Not as much as the boyfriend got, but some. The uniformed man said, could have been a drunk, showing off all alone in the rain. Drunks will do anything. Drunk, hell, the plainclothesman said. The hard throttle set halfway down. The guy's been sapped on the side of the head. Ask me and I'll call it murder. Oz looked at the man with the towel. What do you think, buddy? The man with the towel looked flattered. He grinned. I say suicide, Mac. None of my business, but if you ask me, I say suicide. First off, the guy plowed an awful straight furrow down the pier. You could read his tread marks all the way nearly. That puts it after the rain like the sheriff said. Then he hits the pier hard and clean, or he don't go through and land right side up. More likely turned over a couple of times, so he had plenty of speed and hit the rails square. That's more than half throttle. He could have done that with his hand falling, and he could have hurt his head falling too. Oz said, you got eyes, buddy. Frisked him? He asked the deputy. The deputy looked at me, then at the crew against the wheelhouse. Okay, save that, Oz said. A small man with glasses and a tired face and a black bag came down the steps from the pier. He picked out a fairly clean spot on the deck and he put the bag down. Then he took his hat off and rubbed the back of his neck and stared out to sea, as if he didn't know where he was or what he had come for. Oz said, there's your customer, Doc. Drove off the pier last night, around 9 to 10. That's all we know. The small man looked at the dead man morosely. He fingered the head, peered at the bruise on the temple, moved the head around with both hands, felt the man's ribs. He lifted a lax, dead hand and stared at the fingernails. He let it fall and watched it fall. He stepped back and opened his bag, took out a printed pad of DOA forms and began to write over a carbon. Broken neck's the apparent cause of death, he said, writing, which means there won't be much water in him, which means he's due to start getting stiff pretty quick now he's out in the air. Better get him out of the car before he does. You won't like doing it after. Oz nodded. How long dead, Doc? I wouldn't know. Oz looked at him sharply and took the little cigar out of his mouth and looked at that sharply. Pleased to know you, Doc. A corner's man that can't guess within 5 minutes has me beat. The little man grinned sourly and put his pad in his bag and clipped his pencil back on his vest. If he ate dinner last night, I'll tell you, if I know what time he ate it, but not within 5 minutes. How would he get that bruise falling? The little man looked at the bruise again. I don't think so. That blow came from something covered, and had already bled subcutaneously while he was alive. Blackjack, huh? Very likely. The little ME's man nodded, picked his bag off the deck, and went back up the steps to the pier. An ambulance was backing into position outside the stucco arch. Oles looked at me and said, "Let's go." Hardly worth the ride, was it? We went back along the pier and got into Oles' sedan again. He wrestled around on the highway and drove back towards town along a 3-lane highway washed clean by the rain. Past low rolling hills of yellow-white sand terraced with pink moss. Seaward a few gulls wheeled and swooped over something in the surf, and far out a white yacht looked as if it was hanging in the sky. Oles cocked his chin at me and said, "You know him?" "Sure, the Sternwood chauffeur. I saw him dusting that very cart out there yesterday." "I don't want to crowd you, Marlowe. Just tell me, did the job have anything to do with him?" "No, I don't even know his name." "Owen Taylor." "How do I know? Funny about that. About a year or so back, we had him in the cooler and a Manac rap. It seems he run Sternwood's Hacha daughter, the young one, off to Yuma. The sister ran after them and brought them back and had Owen heaved in the icebox. The next day she comes down to the DA and gets him to beg the kid off with the U.S. cuter. She says the kid meant to marry her sister and wanted to, only the sister can't see it. All she wanted was to kick a few high ones off the bar and have herself a party. So we let the kid go, and then darn it if they don't have him come back to work. And a little later we get the routine report on his prince from Washington, and he's got a prior back in Indiana. Attempted holdup 6 years ago. He got off with 6 months in the county jail, the very one Dillinger bust out of. We hand that to the Sternwoods and they keep him on just the same. What do you think of that?" "They seem to be a screwy family," I said. "Do they know about last night?" "No. I gotta go up against them now." "Leave the old man out of it if you can." "Why?" "He has enough troubles and he's sick." "You mean Reagan?" I scowled. "I don't know anything about Reagan. I told you, I'm not looking for Reagan. Reagan hasn't bothered anybody that I know of." Oles said, "Oh," and stared doubtfully out to sea, and the sedan nearly went off the road. For the rest of the drive back to town, he hardly spoke. He dropped me off in Hollywood near the Chinese Theater and turned back west to Alta Brea Crescent. I ate lunch in a counter. I looked at an afternoon paper and couldn't find anything about Geiger in it. After lunch, I walked east on the boulevard to have another look at Geiger's store.